in Robotics Day. I'm Sara, a fourth-year mechatronics student at the University of Queensland, and I'll be hosting the panel discussion and asking some great questions that we've received from the members of our audience to the wonderful panelists. As many of you know, robotics is an exciting and rapidly evolving field. However, like many areas of technology and engineering, women are still underrepresented. Today, we'll hear from women who've broken through barriers, made significant contributions to the field, and are paving the way for future generations. So I'll take a moment now to introduce the panelists, and then I'll start with the first question. So we have with us today Dr. Chung, Associate Professor from the University of Queensland. Her research interests include perception, planning and learning for robotic mobile manipulation, algorithms for robot navigation through human crowds, informative path planning, and adaptive sampling. We also have Nicci Rossouw, the CEO of Robotics Australia Group. Prior to her role at Robotics Australia Group, she was the founder and CEO of Exaptech, a startup company she founded in 2015 to provide service robotics solutions to the Australian market. She's also provided numerous robotic telepresence solutions to educational facilities and businesses to augment communication and movement for disabled and incapacitated people. We also have Dr. Jasmine Martin, lecturer from the University of Queensland, whose current research interests are in change detection for low signal to noise ratio applications in various domains. And last but not least, Dr. Scarlett Raine, Research Fellow at QUT Centre for Robotics. She conducts research at the intersection of robotics, computer vision, artificial intelligence, environmental monitoring, and marine conservation. So thank you all for making the time to share your experience here with us today. So the first question I have for all the panelists is, why did you enter the robotics space and what motivates you to stay in it? And also, please feel free to do a quick intro about yourself and the work you do before answering the question. So yeah, maybe you can start, Jen.
All right. Thanks very much for the introduction, Sarah. I think you hit everything that I do already, so I don't need to say too much more. We work on robots that move around in human spaces and have to physically interact with stuff. Regarding the question, how did I enter robotics and what makes me want to stay? It's kind of a long-winded story how I ended up in robotics, but back when I was a teenager, somebody told me that I argued a lot and I should be a lawyer. And I told them that I'd rather do something more interesting, like become a rocket scientist. And that kind of just spiraled a bit out of control. So when I went to choose subjects for university, I was looking at what my options were, and I was living in Sydney at the time, and they had a really great aerospace program, which seemed like the kind of thing you should study if you're going to go become a rocket scientist. But at the end of my degree, I realized that there wasn't really a lot of job opportunities for rocket scientists in Australia, at least not around the 2010s. And my bachelor thesis supervisor at the time was the space professor, but he was kind of masquerading as a space professor because his true love was in aerial robotics. And so he convinced me to stick around and do a PhD, and that's how I ended up here. Why I stay? I think it's such an exciting space. There's so much cool stuff going on. I think there's a lot of energy in this space, and I see it growing really rapidly. So having watched it kind of ramp up from, when I was doing my bachelor's all the way through my PhD. So now, yeah, there's really a lot of cool things happening. There's always new problems to try and solve. So we're nowhere near the end of the work that we have to do. So that's what motivates me to stick around.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. Well, Jasmine, maybe if you would like to go next.
Sure. Thank you for your introduction. As Jen said, I think you've introduced me wonderfully and I have nothing else to add. Why did I enter the robotics space? I was lucky enough that my high school teacher pushed me into do engineering. I always enjoyed math in high school. I'd actually never even deeply considered uni. No one in my family had been to uni, but he said, yeah, I think you should do engineering. This is something you like, just give it a go. And so I think, as at most unis, I did this general first year. And I don't have any fascinating story that like I always like to tinker or anything. I was just really indecisive, and I enjoyed so many different aspects from the degree that I was like, oh, if I do mechatronics and robotics, I can play with all of it. And so that's why I chose that. Getting into academia, I did a fun final year project with a supervisor. I really enjoyed the process. I ended up writing a paper for that. Yeah, and I had a really good time with that. And so I thought I'll do a PhD, which is a sequence of papers. Enjoyed that. Yeah, that's my story.
Oh, amazing. Thank you. And would you like to go next, Nicci?
Thanks, Sara. Yeah, so as your introduction said, I had my own robotics company, and that came out of a previous company that my husband and I were the founders of, Tabar, which is an agile consultancy company. And I was responsible for business development there and hosting conferences such as Workplace Happiness, which for some is a contradiction in terms. But we explored technology that we could have people attend the conferences that weren't necessarily based in Melbourne, where we were hosting them. And we started with a double telepresence robot. We bought one and we trialed it at the event. And it was such a great success. We had people from America dialing in and from New Zealand that we decided to buy some more, import them, and yeah, try and sell them in Australia. And that was early 2014. So very new space for telepresence robots at the time. And yeah, I had great success in selling them. And Exaptech was born out of that. And we decided to have more robots, not just telepresence. So we got some social robots and some educational robots. And my journey started there. So I don't have an academic background at all. I'm not an engineer. I didn't even actually know anything about robots when I was thrown in the deep end. And I've just recently actually sold Exaptech. So I had it for just short of 10 years. And I sold it just because I just didn't want to import robots anymore, and I got appointed to the role of CEO of Robotics Australia Group, which sort of just happened to be at the right place, right time sort of fit. And yeah, so I lead the peak body for robotics in Australia at the moment. And why do I stay in it? I think the use of robots and the application, whilst we sort of at the early stages of it in field robotics, certainly in Australia, there's so many uses and applications for it. And we've just completed the Robotics Roadmap for Australia, the 3rd edition, and we had 18 chapters. So if people think robots aren't being used in Australia, I've got news for you. They are being used, and in 18 different sectors, which could really astound people if they don't really know anything about robotics. So yes, I'm a passionate advocate for it, and I believe there's a lot of use for it. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing, Nicci. And Scarlett?
Thanks so much, Sara, and thank you for the really nice introduction. The only thing I would correct is that I'm not quite a doctor yet. I only recently finished my PhD, but it's very exciting to hear you say that, and hopefully in the next few weeks.
Yep, soon to be doctor.
Yeah, not far off, not far off.
Yeah.
But yeah, so for me, I have like a similar origin story to Jasmine, in that I was doing engineering. I liked maths and physics, but then I didn't know exactly which one I wanted to specialize in. So yeah, I picked robotics because it had a real diversity in terms of you could do mechanical, electrical, software, and incorporates all those different skill sets. But now that I'm in robotics, I think it's really exciting. And I think Nicci just touched on this really nicely. I'm interested in lots of different problems, industries, and challenges. And robotics is a great way to use your technical skills, but for a lot of different challenging problems. So at the moment, I'm working in environmental monitoring and reef conservation. So that's an area that I'm really, really passionate about. But I'm not a marine scientist. I'm I'm a roboticist. So having that technical skill set enables me to look at all these other challenging problems outside of the technical space. So I think it's an amazing way to make a lot of really good impact in a range of different problems and a range of different sectors. So that's why I like robotics, and that's definitely motivating me to stay in this field.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you for sharing. You all seem to have really interesting starts and intros to robotics. So just following on that, a question we had is, what has been the most exciting step in your career so far? So yeah, we'll go in the same order if that's okay.
Sure. I think you're all lined up in the order on my screen as well, so it'll be easy to follow along.
Perfect.
Most exciting step in my career. I've been very lucky in my career because I managed to find work around the world. So I did my PhD in Sydney. Then following that, I went off to do a postdoc in the US in Oregon State University. So I was 3 years there working on a couple of projects sponsored by various groups. One sponsored by NASA, which was very exciting, looking at UAVs in the national airspace. And then afterwards, postdocs, which are generally fixed term, you're always looking for what to do next. And we were very lucky in being able to find work also in Europe. So we went to go to ETH Zurich, which has some of the most exciting robotics work coming out, I think, globally, really. It's such an exciting place to be in Zurich. Not only do they have fantastic universities, there's a huge startup culture, and all the big tech companies are based there as well to hoover up the amazing graduates that come out of that place. So it was really fun to be a researcher there at the time because you work with all this amazing talent. That's where I picked up a lot of new skills. And I feel like with every job change, with every career move that I've made, I've been extremely lucky in finding great mentors who have let me grow and have been able to accommodate, what my skills were at the time that I joined and understood where I wanted to go with my career after that, and given me the space to grow into it. Because I would say moving from my PhD into Oregon State as my postdoc, I had some idea about, field robotics and reinforcement learning, but then I moved into a lab that was very much in multi-agent, multi-robot systems. So I picked up a lot of new stuff there. And then from there, moving into ETH in Switzerland, I picked up a lot in terms of, perception, interaction, grasping. That was all fabulously new to me when I joined there 4.5 years ago. And so every step has been pretty exciting. And to be able to come back to Australia has been extremely rewarding. It was something that was kind of always on the radar for me. And to be able to come back and kind of grow my own team to continue solving the problems that we'd teased at in all of these various other places, that's been very exciting. So don't make me pick a favorite. I've liked all of them. And hopefully I will continue to like all of them equally.
That's great to hear. Thank you so much for sharing. Yeah, Jasmine.
I'm gonna pick a favorite. No, so one of the most exciting things that I have done is I worked for a very long time on a industry collaboration with Boeing on their sense and avoid, so trying to stop aircraft colliding with each other when there is no pilot. And there's something so rewarding about scribbling down all your little sums and doing all your proofs and your theorems, but actually seeing it implemented, seeing it flying, and it works as the theory says it should work, for me is probably one of the most rewarding parts, turning that theory into application. And so that code that we wrote and that we had all the principles, mathematical framework to say it should work as it does, was able to be flown in Australia, in the US, and that's my favorite, most rewarding part.
Awesome, thank you. And Nicci, please.
I probably think I've had a very diverse career, but I'd probably say a highlight for me has been taking on the leadership of Robotics Australia Group and shaping and getting the community together. I've been in the role for 14 months now, and it's an absolutely fantastic community. I'm absolutely astounded at how phenomenally capable our roboticists are in Australia. I think it's acknowledged worldwide that roboticists in Australia, you certainly want them on your team if you can get them and find them. Jen, I'm delighted that you've come back to Australia. I've spoken to many people that have returned back to Australia. They spread their wings, go off, and then come back. And it's always good to have that experience embedded in our industry. So, yeah, I think I'm inordinately lucky to be in the position I am at the moment.
Amazing, thank you. And
I would say for me that my current stage of my career is the most exciting. So for me, I've just come out of my PhD and started as a research fellow at QUT just a few months ago. And the work in my PhD was practical in nature. I was designing AI for coral monitoring and seagrass monitoring with underwater and surface vehicles. But a lot of that work was just on the desktop, basically. So someone else had collected the data, brought it back, and I'm sitting at my desk, tip-tapping away on my keyboard, doing the analysis and doing the experiments. Now, as a research fellow, I'm working on a reef restoration project with the Australian Institute of Marine Science, but under the Reef Restoration and Adaptation Program, which is a really big endeavour between lots of universities and research organisations. And so now I'm actually writing code and developing AI models that need to go in the field. So, even just this week, I've been in the Whitsundays trying to make models work on board a constrained device on a boat that's rocking around in the ocean and it's starting to rain and all of these different conditions. So I think this is by far the most exciting phase of my career because I feel like I'm actually making a really tangible impact now. The code that I write will end up deploying baby corals onto the reef. And I need to know that it works well because we want the baby corals to go to the right place. So I think that for me, this is definitely the most exciting part, and it speaks to what Jasmine was talking about just a moment ago as well, as like really seeing what you're doing working out in the real world. I think that's super rewarding and really exciting.
Yeah, awesome. Just to follow up on something you mentioned before, Scarlett, you said at the moment you're working with people who are not necessarily technically in the field that you're in, like the marine area, the environmental area. What are some challenges that you've specifically faced, or I guess how has it been collaborating with individuals that are specifically in your field of study?
That's a really nice question. Thanks, Sara. So I think there's two sides to my answer. So of course, on the upside, it's so exciting working with people that come from different backgrounds, different areas of expertise. Sometimes we meet with traditional owners and Indigenous ranger groups as well. And, meeting with these range of people, they give you amazing inspiration, amazing ideas. A lot of these people are out on the reef doing their own reef restoration using different methods. So, you learn so much. And you always come back from the field with a new perspective of how you could tackle something or what's actually important in terms of what you need to achieve. In terms of the challenges that sometimes you face is that I think there's sometimes a little bit of an idea that AI can do anything. And that like you can just ask the AI to do something and it'll just do it for you, and that like endless resource that's just super easy and no problem. But obviously, even though we've got things like ChatGPT now, that doesn't necessarily mean that we have AI that's really good at telling the difference between specific species of corals, for example. That's the task that's hard for humans to do. So if it's hard for a human to do, it's going to be really hard for AI to do it. So I think sometimes it's really important to communicate like the limitations or the realities of what the technology can do and try and make that really accessible so that people who don't have that technical background can still easily grasp what it is you're trying to achieve and how you're going to do it. So I think, collaboration is one of the best parts of my job. I think, we would not be able to achieve anything that we can without working with a really diverse range of stakeholders and getting lots of different perspectives. But I think, sometimes you have to sort of communicate the realities of where the tech's at and, how it's still limited. yeah, that would be
Yeah,
my answer to that one.
awesome. Thanks, Scarlett. I also wanted to follow up on something you mentioned, Jen, about working in Zurich and also doing your research in Oregon. What have you found to be challenges, or not challenges necessarily, but what have you found is the difference between how Australians or robotics places in Australia approaches solving problems like versus overseas?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great question. I think there's always cultural differences. And one thing is that I would say universities, tertiary education are a kind of culture in themselves. So when you move across countries and continents and you continue working in universities, you find that they are uncannily similar in many ways, even if the native language is something that's different. So in some ways, moving across the world and then working in a university, you're not actually going that far away from what you're used to. But there are some cultural differences in, I think, the way that they approach education, research, and industry. So both the US and Europe are much bigger players. And I think Nicci can back us up on this one as well. Australia, as far as size goes, money, population, and just resources, is much smaller. And I think in that sense, the scale means that we prioritize differently to the US and to Europe. Now, the US, I loved my time in the US because it taught me to be optimistic. Americans are the most optimistic people you will ever meet. They will say yes to anything, right? They'll try anything at least once. And that's what I love about them. And I hope that I was able to take that with me, because in Europe, they won't say yes until they're absolutely sure that it's going to work. And then when they say yes, they will make sure it works. They will see it all the way through. And I feel like that's the difference between the biggest difference I felt between the US and Europe. In Australia, I think we're kind of stuck a little bit in the middle ground still at the moment. Hopefully with the Robotics Australia group and more cohesion across the community, we can build a little bit more confidence amongst ourselves, because I think we have an amazing talent pipeline. Our universities are world class. We really teach a really great program of all of the technical skills that, I think we're really up there compared to all these other places around the world that are these big players. But we need more investment. We need the government to take this technology seriously and to take our place in that seriously. And I think we're demonstrating that at the university level. And I think there are many startups and a lot of industry that's also pushing in the same direction. So I mean, that's one of the reasons that motivates me to stick around, and one of the reasons why I wanted to come back to Australia, because I saw it was growing in that direction.
Yeah, that's great to hear. And going back to your point, and also Nicci's point about working in a startup space or working in academia, what has inspired you to pursue a career in industry or like the startup space or academia? And please share your thoughts on how you think it compares, how the two compare essentially. And this is a question for all the panelists.
Okay, maybe I'll start again then. So I don't have any experience in industry, really. I mean, I've worked with industry, we've collaborated on multiple projects, but I've never been an employee at a robotics company. So I can't give you that experience from that perspective. I will tell you that academia is not just about research, especially in Australia. There's always the teaching elements that come into play as well. So you don't get to spend all your time working with robots, which would be wonderful, but that's not the case when you get into faculty. Scarlett, hang on to that for as long as you can. So that's my advice to you. But now, yeah, academia in Australia, at least there's a balance between our teaching duties, but they're very important because they bolster our talent pipeline. That's where we're looking to find the next crop of students who are going to come through PhD, continue on to research, and then, build those companies and develop those products and deploy them in the real world. I think the comparison is that if as an academic in a university, if you have the capacity to do research, then you really are able to call the shots on what you want to work on. So you get to work on the projects that you're excited about. There's no higher power in some sense to tell you, no, you actually have to work on this or that for the company's bottom line. You're always driven by forces like funding and whether those funding agencies are excited about what you want to work on. So you have to always hone up on those pitching skills. That's the same whether you're in industry or in academia. You're always trying to sell an idea and convince people that your problem is the one that's worth supporting. So I think those two are rather similar. Yeah, but at least from my colleagues in industry, what I hear is that the level of academic freedom that you get is the biggest difference between academia and industry.
Yeah, wow. Interesting. Okay. Nice. Jasmine?
Yeah, I I've dabbled in industry for a little bit. I worked as a software engineer, and definitely what Jen was saying in that lack of freedom to solve. It's not even that they don't necessarily have interesting problems. There's no academic curiosity and like, oh, maybe we can solve it this way. Maybe we can, what if this might make it better? It's just, this needs to work, get it working, move on. And there's no avenue to be like, yeah, to really explore, no academic curiosity. But also, that's probably one of the, in my experience, the biggest differences. But in terms of what motivates me to stay in academia, as Jen was saying, we get these quite large, maybe it just feels large because it's week 10, but these teaching loads. But I really find that they're a key aspect of the reward of academia, like being able to sort of cultivate, and you do get freedom into how you are delivering the content of the unit. Obviously, you need to meet the learning outcomes and the learning objectives, but you really do get to teach how you want to teach. And I find that really exciting and rewarding. And I really do love teaching. And I do love being able to, when I do get time to do some research, to have that flexibility and freedom to explore the research topics that are of interest to me.
Yeah, great. Just following up on that, sorry. I was wondering, so if you have, let's say, a student who's just recently graduated with their engineering bachelor's degree, would you think it's best if they have some experience first in industry or experience first in academia and then sort of decide which way to go?
I really think for me, it was really good to have a little bit of experience in industry, just so I knew I'm not always looking over and saying, oh, is this grass always greener? Like, I don't ever think more knowledge is harmful, but if you are looking at pursuing a PhD, a lifestyle change from an industry salary to a PhD salary is obviously, realistically, a bit more of a challenge.
Yep, makes sense. And Nicci, if you'd like to share.
Well, look, I don't, as I mentioned, I'm the least academic person on this panel here today. So I can talk
I'd just like to know about your experience in the startup space.
Well, how long have you got? How long is a string, and what is your appetite for stress that I can put you through? So startups, what can I say? The average age for people that go into startups, believe it or not, is 50 in Australia. So I probably would have just pipped that, just been a little bit younger when I took on Exaptech. For robotic companies in Australia, it's a tough journey. And as Jen mentioned, funding is an eternal issue for people. I was bootstrapped, fortunately. And what I didn't mention when I sold my company, yeah, I wasn't bankrupt or anything. I was firmly in the black, but I just decided that, it was a different phase of my life that I was going on. So I think in terms of your question, just that you've asked now, to Jasmine, should you have industry experience? I highly recommend it for academics to go and have industry experience so that you can actually, when you're advising students on their journey, And I would actually advise this to any school teachers. To me, I think it's one of the biggest things where we fall short is that our teachers aren't forced to go and work in industry, not go to do a practical at a school, but actually go and do a practical somewhere else in the world, at an accounting firm, at a robotics firm, at a dentist, or whatever the case may be, so that when they actually go and teach, they actually know what they're talking about, the world out there that they're preparing the students to go into. So yeah, from a startup perspective, I host the podcast Let's Talk Robotics, and I've probably spoken to about 163 people in the robotics community to date. So you ladies, you're all on my hit list. I'll be hitting you up soon enough. But the last one that I did yesterday with Australian Droid and Robotics, David was talking about experiences in startup land. And I think for a lot of startups out there, make sure you talk to your community. It can be a very isolating journey because you think everything that you're experiencing, no one else is, but you're actually wrong. Everyone is experiencing it. It's like mothers having babies. You think you're the only person in the world that's having these problems, but you're not. Trust me. Scarlett, PhD, my son's just completed his, so I'm sure you two can compare notes about you, the only two people that have suffered through this PhD journey. You're not. So share your stories, reach out to your community and your network, because lessons learned from others, that's always a very valuable thing. And also just to let you know, if you've got a good idea, robotics is about solving a problem. That's what robots really excel at. That's why we use robotics. We're fixing, there's a solution that you're bringing to market. So if you've got a good solution, then, hopefully you'll attract funding. It is a bit of a tough journey in Australia. It's a much smaller market than you're competing with overseas. One of our network members, Hemba Karmas from Contactile, was telling me she pitched to an American company, and Jen, you could probably talk to this as well. It's a completely different pitch deck that you would do to Australians. Australians are very, they don't toot their own horns, a bit of tall poppy syndrome that comes into play here. Americans, if you're pitching to them, you better make sure you toot your own horn. But Heba was telling me on a podcast that she said, look, number one, she's a woman, and we all can acknowledge that women don't attract the funding that they should in Australia and the rest of the world. So that's number one. And secondly, she said she was Australian, so she would be sort of deprecating about herself. So don't knock money off from that point of view. And she said, and what she's asking for is, please also, she's already discounted the money, so just give her what she wanted. And she told me she got her funding. So a little bit of lessons to be learned from that out there. Look, I think if you've got it in you and you think it's a journey for you, you've got what it takes to do a startup. The average year, like by 5 years, you're either going to sink or swim. Like that's on average what happens in Australia and probably the rest of the world as well. So if you've got the appetite for a bit of stress, go for it. If you've got a good idea, go for it. And, there's a huge community out there to help, and especially in the robotics place, Robotics Australia group, that's one of our main focuses, is to highlight the work that robotic companies are doing in Australia.
Yeah, great. So just to follow up on that, do you think funding is one of the main obstacles stopping people from starting their own startups younger? Or if that's not the case, then how do you think we could encourage younger people, specifically younger women, to work in this space or want to work in this space?
Look, funding is always an issue. And, if you've spun out of a university, you've got a PhD and that you've been working with a university to get funding, if you're lucky enough, CSRO, or if the universities can fund you in collaboration, that's a great way. There's always an IP issue there that you're going to need to work out depending on which university you're working. Look, I don't necessarily know that it's a woman, male, female thing. I think the average age is because people have had careers, they've decided they've got good ideas and they don't want to work for people anymore. And when you start your journey, there are a lot of unknowns out there that you don't necessarily know what you don't know, and you're going to find it out the hard way. And it could mean that you start a company and you go bankrupt, and you have to be prepared for failure. So I think my advice to younger women, if they're deciding they want to go this journey, is get really good mentors out there. Find people that have walked this journey, that have done it, male, female, identify them on LinkedIn, find them, university lecturers. Everyone's got experience that they can share with you. And, that's maybe if I was 25 or 30 and thinking this is what I do, that's what I would do. I'd go and find mentors and make sure of people that they've walked the path and they can teach you something.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you. And Scarlett?
So I think the original question was about industry academia.
Okay. Yeah. What made you pursue a career in academia?
Thank you. So for me, I haven't spent any time in industry. I've always been in various research organizations and universities. For me, it's because I am really driven and motivated by the idea of discovering something new, being at that real bleeding edge of what's possible. I think it's really exciting if you're tackling this problem, you're like, oh, I don't know what to do. And then you have this thought where it's like I'm the person in the world that's like most qualified right now to come up with a solution for this very specific problem that I'm tackling, because I'm right at the edge of what we know. And I think that is a really, really exciting space to be. For me, the other reason why I'm in academia is because I'm also motivated by this, maybe it's naive, but by this idea that I can save the world, or that I can save the reef, I can save the environment, And, this kind of quest, it's not necessarily a money-making enterprise. We're sinking into into the reef to try to save it. And so, yeah, I think that also lends itself to being kind of a research, a scientific endeavor, more than in some ways, more than a commercial one. So I think because I have these interests in solving these challenging problems and saving the world. I think that's why research and why academia suits me. But I also have many friends who thrive in industry as well. So I think it really depends on the person, what you want from your career and what you're passionate about, for sure.
Yeah, awesome. And on the topic of young people, young students, what do you think the biggest misconceptions are that young students have, or engineering students have in general? And this is a question for all the panelists, so we can start to go in order again.
Yeah, okay. I think maybe it's one that I had and I still have, is if somebody asked me what does an engineer do, I would have no idea how to answer that question, because I don't know. When I went through school, when I went through primary school, high school, I just thought an engineer was someone who wore a hard hat and did something in high vis. I'm still not sure if I qualify as an engineer. I think I hear people saying, like, you solve problems, and I guess a robotics engineer is a person who solves robotics problems. Yeah, I think that there's some misconceptions potentially about what robotics encompasses, because it's a really big field and it's growing all the time. Robotics is not just hardware. Robotics is not just computer science. It's that combination of all of it. It's the embodiment. You have the ability, you have a physical system that's capable of doing something in the physical world, but that something and how it does that, all that needs to be encoded somehow in the software that's on board. So everything from designing sensors and motors and actuators all the way through to the person that codes the AI that goes into the brain of the robot, anything that you can imagine inside there, all the material design, material science of how you design the body of the robot and then how you would control it. All of that's part of it. And it's kind of bleeding into every possible area these days as well, because of the possible applications that you see for embodied systems, intelligent embodied systems moving and operating in our environment. So there's the element of, designing and coming up with new algorithms and new mechanisms that can create new robots. And then there's the work of actually making them do something useful. And in that case, you can't be removed from the stakeholders, not in any way. I mean, Scarlett's given a great example of that, and Nicci and Jasmine as well. I've talked about how they need to work with stakeholders all the time, because we can sit in our universities and make up problems to solve, but they're completely useless solutions. Like nobody needs this solution. So you have to talk to people who are out there saying, you know, this is a pain point. Our reef is suffering, or we have workers who have tertiary degrees opening and closing boxes all the time. How can we bring automation? How can we bring robotics into it? And then there's that whole element of being able to work with those stakeholders and then bring their expertise in. And that really is making robotics grow to require all sorts of skills. So I think you don't need to just be somebody who enjoys, you know, making little Legos. You don't need to be somebody who enjoys coding all the time. I think there's a space for everyone who has some idea of what they want to do in terms of solving a real tangible problem in the real world to come and work in robotics.
Yeah, awesome. Jasmine?
I don't think I need to answer. I think Jen just hit the nail absolutely on the head. I just think I 100% agree with everything you said. It's not, I think a misconception you hear a lot is, oh, I don't like math. I don't want to go into robotics. I don't like programming. But it's not that. Like the core of robotics is like sense, decide, act that can be applied anywhere. It can be implemented anywhere. You can focus on any of those aspects. It's such a huge field and it's so relevant in so many different disciplines.
Yeah, for sure. I agree as well. I think what Jen mentioned at first, where it's like, what even is engineering? You can't really pinpoint what it is. And even now that I'm doing it, it's hard to explain to people who are not doing engineering what it is. So yeah, no, for sure, it's definitely.
I mean, it sounds like roboticists that can solve problems are the real engineers.
Yeah, for sure. What are your thoughts, Nicci?
Look, I think it starts in terms of the problem of people not knowing what engineering is. I think it's a twofold thing. We need more people, women on Google algorithms with photos, that if you're searching for the word engineer, robotics engineer, you know, then Scarlett's photos pops up, or Jasmine or Jen, or whoever's photo pops up, so that people go, oh, there are lots of women doing engineering. And I think the education process, and I think Engineering Australia has actually identified this, is that it starts a little bit at schools, that the kids don't actually know, and there's this misconception with primary school kids, what's an engineer, and only, you know, super smart boys can do this. I think and I'm sorry to put this back onto you ladies, that you have to go and see schools and you have to go and talk to them about what engineering means. And, you know, this is a career in engineering. Yeah, there's some really good advocates, younger women out there doing this type of work, and I think it makes a profound difference. And in terms of the algorithms, as I've mentioned, you know, it's probably good to have a photo of yourself there saying, you know, I'm a robotics engineer and this is the work that I do, wherever you get the opportunity to do it. And I know, you know, maybe some people don't want their photos out there, but it's actually quite important, because then when you see the algorithms of male, female, you go, oh, look at all these women. There are lots of women, they're engineers, and they're robotic engineers, and that's the work that they're doing.
Sorry to just quickly interrupt. I really, really agree with what Nicci is saying, because that is my story. Like, I was told by my high school teacher, and there were only 2 women in my small public state high school class. We were told by this math teacher, we were like, you should both do engineering, you're good at math. And we were actually the only 2 females in our cohort, and we went through, and she pursued industry and I pursued academia. But you're so right, it starts in high school, and it was both our choices were just because he said, like, it is generational. Like, we didn't have mums that were engineers. Like, a lot of people had dads that were engineers, and they were encouraged growing up. But like, changes take time, and I think it is important to have faces out there so it doesn't feel so out of reach and so uncommon.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, for sure.
I completely agree with what everyone said. The only thing I would add as well is that I think, you know, I did used to go to schools. It was my job during uni was to represent the university, go out to schools, teach everyone what's engineering, talk about my experience. And I remember speaking to just so many girls constantly, and they'd be like, oh, I'm not smart enough to do engineering. Like, as Jasmine mentioned, oh, I don't get the top grades in maths or whatever. And it's like, that's just not what engineering is. Like, if you're interested in it and you're passionate about it, then you should definitely go for it. And it's more about whether you like solving problems or looking at challenging, interesting scenarios. Like, it's more about those things and less about having to be like the smartest person, the best person at maths and all of that. So I don't, yeah, as Nicci said, I think we have to do a bit more to change this perception, because yeah, it's definitely still out there.
Yeah, so just building on this discussion, what do you think schools or institutions need to do to better support women wanting to pursue research or a job in STEM fields, or particularly, I guess, in robotics? And what progress have you seen in terms of gender diversity in robotics? So yeah, what needs to be done and what have you seen so far?
Oh, no,
So
Jen, you go.
No, I want to propose we go in the opposite direction because I always take all of the oxygen out. So I want to let everyone go have another shot.
I'll start. I'll mix it right up and then I can go to Scarlett because she's up. I really felt like it was getting better. And then this current semester in my unit, I have 2 women out of 80. And that really, really upset me because it feels like at the core of it, we're still not. Like, something somewhere along the line. And I wish I had a perfect answer. And I wish I could be like, let's just do this and this will fix it. But I don't. And I thought it was getting better, but anecdotally, for what I'm seeing, it's not. And so why is that, Scarlett?
I think the most critical factor that I've been able to pinpoint, and I think this is a little bit what Nicci was touching on for the previous question actually, is about this idea of representation. So it's really important, like if you're an undergraduate engineering student and you're in this cohort, as you're saying, Jasmine, with only one other girl out of 80 students, that's really, really hard going. And it's even harder if you then don't have any female tutors to look up to. So you're getting taught by males and you've only got other males in your cohort. So you can't picture the scenario in which you finish that degree and you get to that next level, which, the most basic thing is the tutors that you're seeing every day. Then you're looking at your lecturers and you're going, okay, out of all my lecturers that I've ever had, maybe I've been fortunate to be taught by Jen or Jasmine if you're at UQ, but maybe you did different courses, you didn't have that, and all your lecturers are also men. And so then you're looking at that level and there's no role models or possible mentors for you to have that are female at that level. And then you follow that through. So if you're a PhD student and all your supervisors are men, or you're an early stage lecturer and then all of your head of school and your dean and everyone else, they're all men. I think that makes it really, really hard to really stay in there and keep pushing through, because you can't picture yourself in those positions as easily. So I think, universities need to do more. So it could be specific scholarships for students. It could be targeted recruitment rounds to make sure that there's some representation at all of those different levels so that everyone has role models and mentoring opportunities the whole way through their career. And I think that's, one of the most important things. But then, if you don't have access to amazing female mentors, then you need to find the men who are good mentors and who do support you, because they're out there and, they're doing some of them, a lot of work to try to improve representation of women in this field. So if you can find a decent mentor that's male even, that can still be a great way to try to stick it out. But yeah, I think I think there's a little bit going on, but I don't know that there's enough being done to really tackle this issue from where I'm standing anyway.
Yeah, great.
Okay, so dare I be very controversial and go, perhaps women just don't want to be engineers? Like, we can put it out there. Again, I resort back to children. Then there's a paper written on this. They start choosing their field in which direction they're going to go as young as year 5 and 6, and it's based on their cohorts. So are their cohorts doing humanities or they're doing STEM subjects? And the girls they flip-flop in between that. So if you're fortunate enough to have a friend that you're best friend and she likes STEM subjects, the likelihood is you'll probably follow her in that direction. You know, I've maintained, I've spoken to a lot of teachers on my podcast. I say to them, you should have firemen and firewomen on the pictures of your wall. You know, you should have female doctors and male doctors, because that's as young as the perception is of what we believe we can do. I think in terms of female mentors out there, look, LinkedIn, start mining LinkedIn. To our audience listening, they're absolutely amazing people on LinkedIn, and most of them, in my experience, are extremely generous individuals. If you're in robotics specifically, go to my podcast, Let's Talk Robotics, and hit up the women there. They are all absolutely phenomenal women. And I can tell you now, if you said you listen to the podcast and you need a bit of mentoring, they would make time for you. So I do believe the women are out there. It's probably more education process for people who are floundering a little bit, you know, where do you go and what do you do? So is there something that you address and you say, look, to the ladies in the cohort that are struggling, here's some resources for you to tap into, here's some support groups to talk to. And I'm by no means saying this is an easy industry for women to work in, because it is male dominated. That is a fact of the matter. Will we make inroads? How long has this discussion been going on? Probably 30 years, give or take. Like I'm just plucking a number there of we're underrepresented. And as you've all mentioned, we haven't really made significant inroads into it, despite some initiatives that have been happening. You know, I've noticed that the government has slashed the support program for female-led companies, for startups. That's not there anymore for women to tap into, because they didn't find a notable success rate on it. Yeah, look, I think if you're going to be an engineer, it's something that you're passionate about. And if you think you're going to go into it and not have these challenges, then you should listen and know that you are going to have challenges. But also, I'd like to put it out there, everyone has challenges in their chosen career. So whether it is that there's a discrepancy between the balance of gender, you know, you could have that. But you could look at nursing. It's predominantly a female profession. There are not a lot of males in there. So I do think, and I've spoken to a couple of my guests that have had exactly the same, Jasmine, as you've mentioned, like 2 students out of a cohort of 80. Gail, that works for Robots Bears, and she got a degree probably about 35 years ago. And to her, this just wasn't even a problem. Like, she didn't even, you know, it wasn't even on her radar that she was just one of 2 women in it. So I suppose it could also be, you know, if you're a woman and you know this going into it, and you go, well, that's just how it is, and I'm going to do my degree regardless that I'm 1 out of, you know, of 2 out of a cohort of 80. I'm only 1 of 2 females. Maybe that could work for you in some ways. So look, I don't know what the answers are. My attitude is start at a much younger age at schools, and really a concerted effort at the school level. It's pointless starting in year 9 and 10. The boats have sailed by then. I think schools need to revamp their education system from a much younger age, where kids are they're choosing their cohorts, and they're far more influenceable then at that age, that you go, you know, they're young still. They can go, oh, like, you know, I think the saying is, if you've got a kid until 4 years old, you've either socialized them or you haven't. And I think with kids that are at school choosing directions of, you know, STEM, or I'm good at maths, or I'm not good at maths, these perceptions that are reinforced at a very young level, whether consciously or subconsciously, that's where we need to nip it in the bud.
I really, really agree with that. And I have like a really disheartening anecdotal story. So I take my husband has a robotics company, and just as a side, we take these little robot kits out to school and work with year 5s and 6s, and it's robot wars, so it's robot fighting, so it's really fun, really engaging. And even down to, we'd be presenting to this group of students, year 5 and 6, so young. I think it's so young. And the teachers would be like, oh, these boys are just going to love this. Like the teachers have already dismissed the women as candidates for this robotics workshop. And there's no reason. It's a simple, everyone has these skills, but these teachers are already segmenting these students into, oh, boys, you like robots. Oh, girls, no, you don't. And it's just exposure. Like, do we need to go earlier than year 5 and year 6? Like, that's not fair that their teachers have already segregated them into, you're a boy, you like robots. But another thing you said, Nicci, on like, what can we do to, because we can't really get earlier and earlier. Like, at some point they don't have the skill to engage in these workshops. But like, it still doesn't seem, I still really feel it is generational. Like, these boys have probably tinkered at home, like with their dads. And hopefully coming up, these girls are now starting to tinker as well. Like, I really hope we start to see in the next 5 to 10 years some sort of shift.
Jasmine, can I just add to that I think the shift is going to come when we see more girls doing it. So, whether it is a separate class, because I was talking to a dad about this exact thing, is that, and I actually mentor a young lady, and she was also in a male-dominated environment. And I said to her, do you step in and go, because everyone's doing presentations, and do you do your presentation? When everyone's said, do you say, now it's my turn to do the bit on the presentation on the robot that we were working on? So I think a lot could be done to teach girls better skills, and there's also a paper written on this that boys like a leadership. So young kids, when there's a male that steps into the leadership role, everyone follows them. But when girls do it, they're seen as bossy and bitchy. So like, this is the sisterhood that we have to speak to, that women don't like strong other women because you're seen as, assertive, bossy and bitchy. Like, there's literally a paper written on this. And, is this, how are kids raised? And I mean, I'm not suggesting like that we have to change everyone's, because, how dads talk about you, my little princess, like, that's great for at home. But, how does that translate to the rest of the world? And do brothers and sisters have equal responsibility at home? So, I've got a very strong, my male dominance in my personality is quite developed. So I would be mowing the lawn, doing the chainsaw, and doing all sorts of weird things at home. And my husband would be the one making fantastic dishes. We completely flipped the roles in our marriage, and that just worked very well for us, because I do like cooking, but his was far better than mine. And I actually enjoy mowing the lawn and working with a chainsaw. So, it's those sort of things. How are you raised as well? Are you a competent, and I think for girls, all the ladies listening to this, you want to be a competent human being. You don't want to be a competent woman. You want to be a competent human being that can do stuff. And, you can fix your car punctured, your tires got a flat, or, whatever. You can drill a hole in the wall. And that gives you confidence to step out there in the world and do stuff. So if I think anything that little girls and women in general can work on, is work on competencies that, you're a competent individual. You can actually do stuff and fill a good space in the world.
But do you think they're seen as bossy and bitchy because it's something unfamiliar? Like, is it correlation, causation? Like, do we just need to be putting, like, this is back to the core of what you said before, we need to be putting more women leaders in front of them?
Yes, we do. But this is and I mean, look, I'll have to find the paper where I read this about, how women perceive other women in terms of, when they're strong and assertive. Is it an insult when you call a woman, she's bossy? I go, "Oh, thanks for the compliment. That's great." Like, we all know where we stand. But for some women, that's perceived as, "Oh, that's an insult to me." I go, "No, like if you're in a leadership role, you need to be bossy. You need to fill your space in what you've been employed to do." So, yeah, look, I don't know. Scarlett, Jen, what are your thoughts on this? I don't,
Yeah, I think well, when I was in Switzerland, I was kind of shocked to discover that kids have to make some very serious career decisions at a very young age. They've codified it. At the age of 12, they have to choose whether they continue normal school or if they go to gimme, which is like the more advanced. And your opportunities at the age of 12 start to diverge. So the students that choose to go to the advanced schooling strategy are the ones who are going to have an easier pathway to tertiary education, and the ones who do not. At the age of 12, you're already making decisions about that, which I found extremely shocking, because at the age of 12, who are your influences? Like, how are you making decisions that are going to impact your career for the next 60, 70 years, right? You're not capable of even, we don't let you vote or drive or drink when you're making decisions about your career at such a young age. But they had simply codified what we do societally, so our kids in years 5 and 6 are learning from their teachers, they're learning from their peers, they're learning from their parents, what they see in the media. And if what they see suggests to them that the demographic that they belong to should or should not do one thing or another, that's going to bake its way in one way. So I think that the kind of early decision making, we can't reduce the impact of that. We need to really be aware of what those societal influences are doing to how children are seeing themselves, seeing their possibilities, seeing their opportunities. And yes, especially in Australia, I think so long as you stay in the education system, your opportunities remain fairly open for a very, very long time. So you can always change. And I think what we've talked about today is that robotics is not just one thing. So you can change really at any point and still, find yourself here. But I mean, the other thing that you mentioned, Nicci, was, putting role models out there, showing them that women and a diverse range of folk work in this area. I think that's a hugely important thing. It's something that I try to do even when I'm teaching. So when we bring up topics and we say, okay, this is research that was done by someone, I love to show the picture of who it is, right? And then you get to see, oh, okay, yeah, maybe I can identify with this person. Like, we try to pick broadly. And I know that it was a bit controversial for a while, but people were debating about whether or not you should put your profile photo on your CV. And I came on the side of saying, yeah, I'm going to put my picture on my CV, because the first time you see me, you're going to know I'm a woman and that I'm Asian, right? If the first time you read my name, you're going to know I'm Asian. So I'm not going to hide that fact. That's going to be up to you to decide what you want to think about that. And I get to judge you on that too. So I'm fully into that space, but I understand that I'm in a fairly privileged position now. If I was first coming into this field, I don't know how I would necessarily tackle this problem. Now that, I'm an associate professor at the University of Queensland, yeah, I'm not going to hide who I am. You have to deal with me, like all of this, and then you can decide what you want to think about that. But it was very important for me to get to this stage by having really great mentors. And they weren't all women. And I think some of my best mentors were in fact men. And they were men who were aware of, what the challenges are, not just along the career path, but also the gendered challenges that are out there. And you don't just want to find a mentor. What I might add on to that is say, you want to find somebody who will go that extra step and be a sponsor for you as well. Because everybody loves to mentor other people. Everyone wants to give advice. But sponsorship is that extra step where they're going to use their political capital to help push you forward. So in the meetings where you don't get invited to, they might say, hey, I know that there's this important role coming up and I have a great person in mind who I think could fit that role. That's what a sponsor does. And you want to find those people, you want to make those connections. And really, if you do find that you have people in your network who are doing that for you, you want to build on that as much as you can, because that has been like a huge plus as part of my career. And I think the other important thing of making sure that Well, we don't just only look for women as mentors and sponsors. I think that's very important to have those role models there. And if you can find ones, I think they're great because they have that experience that's going to align more closely with yours. But we have to be careful because there are fewer women in engineering and in robotics. And what we're seeing is that nowadays there's more awareness of this imbalance, of this underrepresentation. And so women who are currently in the field are being asked to do more. Right. So every time there's a panel, like a selection panel here at the university, or they want some set of speakers somewhere, they're going to try and get that, golden 50-50 number. And that means even though they're drawn from a pool where female representation might only be 15%, that means women have to do more work, right? If we're going to end up being displayed at a 50-50 percentage so everybody else can pat themselves on the back and say we did a great job, it means more work for women. So I think that's something we have to be cognizant of, because now, I mean, I do a fair amount of volunteer work for the IEEE Robotics and Automation Society. And we recently had our 40-year anniversary. So that was just last week in Rotterdam. It was really exciting. And there's a huge awareness inside that community. We're very strong. We're 20,000 members around the world. And in the leadership team, if you have a look at our leadership team, it's very balanced, right? There's a lot of wonderful leaders in there from all over the world, all diverse genders, even career levels are well represented in there, academia and industry. But when we look at the numbers of our cohort of our membership, we went from, at the very beginning in 1983, we had 7% women in our society. And now we've doubled it, but we're only at 15%. So when you think about that, we're growing our numbers, but we're nowhere near the balance that we could be seeing. And, at that level, you can really start to understand, what the real challenges are, because you're drawing from a smaller pool of people, a smaller pool of talent. You're asking them to do more to try and solve this problem. But at the same time, I think everybody else in this society, this is our society's problem. This is our community's problem. So we all need to solve it together. Don't just put all that responsibility on the 15% of women who are actually out there. But I think there's a huge role that everybody can play in trying to balance this.
Yeah, I think there's definitely been some really important points that have been discussed. One other thing that I just want to sort of ask you about is, I know Jen mentioned having good mentors and having sponsors has played a really vital role in her career. What do you think, or how do you think we could build stronger networks and support systems? And I know LinkedIn's been mentioned as a way to find mentors and connect with peers, but what do you think are some other ways that women or younger students could reach out to find those mentors or to find those sponsors? We could start with Scarlett again.
Okay. So I think LinkedIn is a great one, obviously, like we've already touched on that. But even more, if you're going ahead on Google Scholar and you're doing some research, looking up an area of interest of yours, and you see some author keeps coming up multiple times, I'm sure a lot of people in the field would be happy to receive an email from a student that's like, oh, I want to get into this field later on. Like, I wondered if we could schedule a short call, something like that. You won't get 100% success rate, but in my experience, oftentimes, people in research, especially, I don't have a huge amount of industry experience, but in research, people are often quite happy to receive an email from someone that's heard of their work or has found them online and thinks that they're doing some interesting stuff. So I think, like when I first started out, I would be so terrified to do that and just to cold call someone or send them an email out of the blue, someone who I've never met. But it's actually quite common, and most people would be happy to receive that. I think as well, if you can start to get into some like actual in-person events as well, that can be great. So I've been to quite a few Engineers Australia events. Oftentimes there's networking events or dinners. If you can go along to some of those, you'll meet some fantastic professionals in academia and also in industry in your local area. And then starting to get into conferences as well can be awesome. I know it's more of like a research thing. You'll do it a lot more if you're doing your postgraduate studies. but I went to just one or two like local Brisbane conferences when I was in undergrad, and just walking around and going to the poster sessions, going to the networking sessions, that can be a great way to meet people. It's scary, of course, but if you just walk up to someone, say hello, again, you're not going to have a 100% success rate. Some people are just unfriendly, but most people are really lovely, and you can just strike up a conversation and build your network that way. And that means you can, you know, have quite a diverse network to draw your mentors from as well. And I think that's helpful, especially if you're early in your career and you're not sure exactly what direction that you're wanting to go in. So those would be my tips, but please, everyone else chime in.
Yeah, awesome. Nicci, would you like to go next?
Well, look, I'm thinking, if you, number one, and this is advice I give to my son, is, you know, build your own LinkedIn profile so that it's interesting, so that people can actually find you as well, and you can have an introduction when you do find them and go, well, you know, can we connect on LinkedIn, so that they can actually have a look at you and see who you are and put in all your papers that you've done, or whatever work that you've done that you're proud of, whatever things you've been involved in. And I think that's becoming increasingly important, is to have a LinkedIn profile. Look, from Robotics Australia Group's point of view, I live on LinkedIn. I'm all over it. I looked up all my fellow speakers here today. I know who you are. I know of your wonderful accomplishments. So it is a very useful tool. As Scarlett says, if you can go to meetup groups, if you go to meetup.com, actually type that in, because in the robotics space, there are lots of meetup groups that you can attend online, and you can listen to talks and things. That's quite a useful resource. I think, you know, conference and things, it just depends on your financial situation. I don't know if students get discounted, but, you know, conferences are really expensive for most people. So hopefully your universities have organized you know, really discounted prices for you, or that you can even go for free. You know, I'm quite passionate about helping students, so I think they have to pay the minimum that they can to be exposed to conferences and you know, other events that they can go to. So yeah, probably everything that Scarlett said, but, you know, focus on your own LinkedIn profile as well. You actually have to put a bit of work into it, so that people can, vice versa, they can check you out when you approach someone and say, look, this is who I am, I need a bit of help, that they can do a little bit of homework on you and go, well, actually, you've put in the work, you were worth helping.
Yep, for sure. Jasmine, would you like to share as well?
Sorry, my internet dropped out, so I don't know what's being said. But for mentors,
Yep.
every organization I have worked at has actually had mentoring programs that you can sign up to, and I have always signed up to them. So I've been fortunate enough to talk to a lot of great people.
Yeah, that's great. So it was just about how you would find a good or stronger network and build a support system through means like LinkedIn or other means that you would come across for your career.
Yeah, so look and see if there are programs for that, because I think it's known that this is important. So places and organizations try to implement this. So see what is already available. And then I heard LinkedIn has already been said, that's a great one. But also the networking events, the clubs, often they have industry nights. Just talk to people, like hear their experiences. People love to talk about themselves.
Yep, that is true. Good advice.
Keep looking at me, Jasmine.
How am I looking at you? We're on Zoom.
Yeah, I totally echo everything that's been said. For research, I mean, self-promotion is kind of the name of the game these days. So if you have any at all interest in learning web design or web development, making your own website is so easy these days that I encourage you, if you really are looking for work or to show off the work that you've done, just build a simple website, put your projects on there, tell them what you're passionate about, and link to your GitHub, link to your Google Scholar, link to your LinkedIn on your website. Just it's your place that you control fully. So you get to really curate how that looks. And then LinkedIn, of course, is a place for professional networking. So also super, super, super important. Other things, I mean, conferences for sure. I mean, we kind of have a policy at UQ that if a student has a paper, we will support them to go to the conference to present it. Like it's just baked in. I mean, we're a research institution. This is our KPI, so it does not make sense for us to hold our students back from publishing. We want them to be able to promote their work and the great work that they're doing at UQ. So absolutely. And when you go to a conference, it's a huge opportunity to network and meet with people, not just folks who are kind of the senior people who are leading the field right now, but to network with your peers, people who are, entering the community at the same stage as you. Because I think there have been some of the most rewarding network connections that I've made at conferences was just making friends, other PhD students who are just starting out, same as I was. And we have conference friends, you see each other maybe once or twice a year at the same conference. You rarely ever connect outside of that. Maybe once or twice you send an email about a paper, but every time you see them, it's always at a conference and you're always talking about how things are going with your research and your career. And I've built like long-lasting collaborations through those connections. Now that I've been here like 10 years now, other folks who I've met during the first couple of conferences I've been to are in the similar stage in their career path. And now we're collaborating across the planet on projects that are still super exciting to everybody involved. So that I think is one of the great benefits of academia, and also one of the reasons why I like to stay in academia is the travel opportunities and the wonderful community of researchers that you get to hang out with. Here locally, what I can suggest is for people who are kind of just starting out and want to see what's out there, there are smaller chapters and smaller clubs and groups. Like there's Women in Robotics, Women in Computing, Women in Tech, Women in Machine Learning. All the meetup groups, if you can find them, will also generally have regular meetups. The Robotics and Automation Society has a RAS chapter here in Queensland. And the current president is actually one of our UQ alums. He graduated from his PhD just a couple of years ago. So Ben Tam is currently the president. Very friendly guy. Definitely reach out to him on LinkedIn if you're interested in joining the chapter. They always promote different activities and sometimes host some themselves as well, where you can get to meet other like-minded people.
Yeah, amazing. This has definitely been a really insightful conversation. We'll have to wrap up soon, so I do want to give you a chance to add some final remarks and tell us, now looking back on your career, what legacy do you hope to leave behind in the field of robotics, especially for future generations of women entering the field? Scarlett, please.
Sure. What a huge question. Oh my goodness, no pressure. I think for me, I'm really driven by these challenging real world applications of robotics and AI. I want my legacy to be a positive one, that I tried as much as I could. I dedicated my career to this cause that I care a lot about, saving the Great Barrier Reef, which is this just wonderful natural resource that we have. But I think in terms of the second half of that question, which is about, female engineers specifically, I'd like to look back and know that I supported our collective cause of trying to encourage more women to get into engineering. And I think I'd like it to be true that any student who came to me and needed support or needed mentoring or needed advice or needed something from me, if it was in my ability to support that student, then I hope I look back and know that I did what I could. So I think that's what I want my legacy to be. I've had so many great mentors, role models, and sponsors, as Jen was talking about in my career so far, even though my career has been very short so far, really. That I'd love to really pay that back as well to other students that are coming through. So I'm hoping that I can make a difference in that way.
Amazing, thank you. Nicci?
Oh gosh, I've got carried away with Scarlett's story now. I just want to pivot quickly back to the websites. If you want really good examples, look at Professor Michael Milford, who's a QUT Center for Robotics. He's got a really good website, and also Professor Toby Walsh, who's of course the godfather of AI and robotics. So if you want to emulate anyone's websites, their personal websites and their journeys, have a look at their websites. And this is advice I've given my son as well, that she's completed his PhD, is start your own website, because that's increasingly going to be, it's good collateral for you to work off when people are researching you. So what is my legacy? And look, I think fundamentally I approach the day, if I can find a space to help other women, I will. If women reach out to me, and if there's any way that I can assist them, I will try and make it happen. And I think probably the legacy, look, if I can aspire to just be a decent human being at the end of the day, and maybe that's the legacy I leave, then I think I'm happy with it. And maybe if I can add that I've got 2 sons that I think are super, super, super lovely human beings. So I think that's my biggest legacy.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And Jasmine?
I think Scarlett summed it up nicely, but I'd love to think that I encourage other up and coming women to give it a go. And I like to think that one of the things I always struggled with is that I always thought like my mentors were these amazing people, and like I could never be like that because I'm just plain old me. But I hope that I can have a legacy of being hopefully relatable. As Scarlett said, I like to think I support people who come to me, and I hope I can help inspire women that robotics actually isn't that scary, and if I can do it, so can you. And as Nicci said, my legacy is I've got a daughter and a son, and they have already entered their first Robo Wars competition with their little 3D printed robots, and they can, in year 5 and year 6, they can be that friend that tells their other friend that robots is really cool.
That's awesome. Thank you. And Jen?
Yeah, look, I think I agree with everything that's been said. I mean, my legacy these days, it's not very much about the work itself, but the people that I get to work with. So all of the students that I've mentored that have come through my team, I think they're going to be the ones who end up doing far more than I can do on my own. So it's definitely about them and how we can continue to kind of that exponential curve of impact that you can have when you mentor and sponsor other people to kind of move into the field. And personally, I think when I did my PhD, the cohort that I was in, I would say about 90% of the graduates from a robotics PhD sadly did not stay in robotics. They moved into other fields. They moved into finance or real estate or banking, something else, which I thought was really such a shame because they're such talented people, like men and women both. And so my personal legacy and what I'm trying to do these days is to stop that bleed because we have amazing talent coming up through the pipeline. And the more people we can keep working in this field, the more diverse we can make that cohort, the better I think the whole field is going to move forward.
Yeah, fantastic. We will have to wrap up here though. So thank you so much to our incredible speakers for sharing your experiences and perspectives, and also for such a thought-provoking and inspiring discussion. I know I've learned a lot, and I'm sure our audience has as well. So I wish you all to have a great rest of your evening, and we hope to see you again at our future events. Thank you so much.
Sarah.
Thanks so much for having me.